All right, welcome. We are here in October, the RSS.com training. I am Greg Wasserman, your head of relationships for RSS.com. I'm incredibly excited about this month's training. If you are tuning in live or if you're following the recording, we always talk about audio and how to get good quality. Up until recently, I was using this headphones until I got this mic, and I was told I do not sound as good on these as I do with that. And that became the whole conversation on how do we make audio better? How do we figure out pre-recording how to get good quality sounding, as well as once I screw up your recording with these mic. How do you fix that? So I'm really excited that we've got the chance to bring in an engineer who does this for a living. So allow me to welcome Joel Oliver, who's the founder and the head of East Coast Studio, who's going to be able to walk us through, answer a bunch of your questions. So if you're in the chat, please bring those in. Joel and I have talked a lot about how we can think about the audio engineering. So let me bring him on in here. Come on in, Joel. Welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Glad to be here. I'm glad you brought up that whole thing about you having to get a better microphone because that's one thing that we're going to chat about here today. I want to impart people like why that right at the beginning is so important in getting a great sounding finished product.
Well, why don't you give people a little background on what you've been doing in this space and why you know what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, well, I actually have a background professionally in audio engineering. So I studied that over 10 years ago. I went to college for for audio engineering. And then as podcasts were growing in popularity, I just happened to be looking for something to use my skill set with. And I started freelancing and got so busy. I eventually started this company, which has been around for almost 7 years now. And we focus on helping a lot of entrepreneurs with their podcasts from start to finish, so the editing and everything else. But I'm doing this stuff on a daily basis. I've pretty much seen it all at this point, from the actual setup of things to editing, fixing issues, knowing all the tools. Uh, there shouldn't be anything that I don't know about.
There you go. There you've heard it from him. So I guess the first thing we can kind of talk about is pre-production, right? So we've kind of joked about the mic. We've also heard about many in terms of where I'm supposed to stand in terms of the distance from the mic. So why don't we start there in terms of just mic placement? Mic. If we think about how many people are afraid to even start recording because of the quality of the mic. So give us a little background and that understanding.
Absolutely, yes, and we can even kind of broaden out here a little to the space even. I like to think about the space even before we get to the mic and then some other things, because, yeah, what I want to impart here is the fundamentals are crucial. Like, we could just go right to how do we fix stuff in editing, but you're gonna avoid so many problems by making sure that you've got a great setup right from the beginning, as you already mentioned. We want to think of editing as a place to do some optimizations and enhancements, but ultimately not to fix things if we can avoid it. We want to get right at the beginning a pristine signal, and that's going to end up giving you a great finished product. So a lot of variables when it comes to these setups. Are we doing solo versus interview? If we're doing interview, are we doing them in person or online? Are we doing audio or video as well? So we can't cover all of the scope here, but I think what the most common ones are solo, so you're just doing it on your own, and also online interviews, like everyone is doing that these days. So we'll focus on kind of the commonalities with those setups. So we'll talk about the mic, the setup, the positioning, and that sort of thing. But one thing that many people may not think about before you even go there is your environment. So the room that you're in, right? How does that sound? Yours seems pretty good.
I those are things I have no clue, right? Like I have no clue what it sounds like until I guess we do playback, which most of us probably aren't doing playback. I would imagine you run into that a lot.
Yes. Okay. Well, you do sound quite good. I hear a little bit of echo, which
Okay.
I'm sure you probably hear that on mine as well, because we can fix that in editing, but we're doing this live. So we think about an environment. If you're trying to pick a space to record in, or evaluate a room, what are the things that we want? We want low noise and we want low echo. So What is noise? Could be like a loud fan, open window. You're just not in a quiet place, like you're in an office with a bunch of people, that sort of thing. We want quiet and low echo. That means like not really a big open space with a lot of say a high ceiling, reflective surfaces. We often hear people talk about like it sounds like you're in a bathroom. People are saying that about your podcast. That's a bad sign. We don't want that kind of echo. So noise and echo, that's the two biggest things about your space. We want to find something that doesn't have those issues. This doesn't need to cost a lot. This can come down to just choosing the space. You don't necessarily have to go and do soundproofing or buy acoustic tiles, that sort of thing. But if you're stuck with a certain space that has those problems, then see what you can do. But start simple. Like if you've got an AC that's loud, see if you can have that switched off for the recording. Or maybe if you got no carpet or anything in there and it's all hard, just hard surfaces, try to put a rug down, maybe a couch, something like that. Like think about those solutions first before we go with anything else. But it's
Which is
good to know
interesting
what.
because I have nothing. I'm literally
Hmm.
staring at a wall in a corner here with a 10-foot ceiling,
Uh-huh.
and what, linoleum or fake floors in that regard. So it's interesting to think is just as you're describing, I have none of what you're describing I should have, yet somehow the design of what I'm working with is functioning.
Yes, and this comes down a lot to microphone and microphone placement. So let's talk about that right now because that's very important. And this is partly why you weren't having good results before you had this mic because it was exaggerating issues within a room. So we definitely recommend a decent microphone. The good news is it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars. Even sub $100, you can get something. You just want to avoid having to use, say, the built-in laptop microphone, that sort of thing. You want to have something that you can direct towards your mouth, a bit of higher quality. You've got a Shure microphone there. I've got one as well. Shure makes some great USB mics. The Blue Yeti is very common despite getting some flack. It's a great mic. It's got a built-in stand. It does the job. Rode, Audio Technica, so many great brand names. The specific mic doesn't necessarily matter unless you need a specific feature. But if you're getting something along those lines, you're good. It really will then come down to how you use it. So you've got yours positioned very well, 6 to 8 inches from the mouth, typically, even up to a foot. If we get it too close, we'll start getting plosives and pops and weird mouth sounds. But then if you move it too far away, you're exaggerating problems in your room, like those noises, like the noise, background noise or echo. So that's exactly what we were getting at with you there. If you had your mic very far away, you would start to exaggerate that bit of echo. Yeah, you can even talk right now.
Yeah, I guess what is it? This is it where I have no clue what it sounds like compared to when I'm actually up here. I
Yep.
do not do I've got my headphones plugged into the actual laptop instead of to the mic because that was just confusing me. Hearing myself speak in that regards, but I guess that's a good thing for just your mic check.
Yes. And we got a great example just as you spoke right now. When you stood farther back, there was a lot more echo and you came up close and it basically went away. So that's why mic placement is really crucial. And if we're not using a mic, like we're just using what's built into a laptop, because that's farther from your mouth, then you always you can have this echo problem if it exists in the room. So yeah, positioning of the mic, very important. And a final thing I would say on the mic section as well is the level setting. So, the gain, it's called in many cases, how loud or not loud is the microphone set? Because we don't want to be too high, we don't want to be too low. Most software will have some sort of level meter where you'll see like a green, yellow, and red scale. If you're hitting red, that's too loud. If you're barely lighting up the green, that's too quiet. So you want to set your level so that on the highest parts, like a yell or a laugh or something, you're not quite hitting the red. But on your normal speech, you're kind of somewhere in the middle, not too quiet. So consider that with the level settings of your mic.
So you bring that up and we did this beforehand. I'm looking at the sound levels of the recording here through Ecamm, and I've changed my level to what is that, 68, I think is what I've got it put at. So you're saying that when I'm talking normally, because I've set it at 68, it's actually going to be lower as opposed to what if I kept it at 100, I'd be in the red and I'm a loud person. So is that kind of what we're hinting at?
Yeah, very possibly. And the different softwares depend, the scales depend, it could be using a different scale. There's going to be a level setting within your microphone as well, its own gain setting. So there's different stages at where you would actually see levels. But what I'm referring to specifically with the mic is at your recording, when you're doing the recording, what is coming in from your mic and your guests for that matter, which we'll get to in a moment.
And then when you say gain, I'm sorry. What is gain?
Gain, just think of it like a volume control. Just how loud or soft are we setting the microphone to? So if you talk really quiet, you would want more gain to bring that level up. If you talk really loud, well, you don't need as much, but you want to have it set somewhere that gets the level coming in to, like where I mentioned there, like a reasonable place on the meter. So it's pretty simple. It's just a different word.
There you go. That you heard it from him. All right, what else we got?
The next thing I would like to touch on is the recording platform. So we've got our nice space, we've got a nice mic. How are we recording it? Because the way audio works, it has to do with the weakest link in the chain. If you've got a great space and a great mic, but you have a really bad recording platform, then it's all going to sound bad. You need everything to be good along the way. So a lot of options and variables here again. If you're doing something important I want to mention, if you're doing just solo audio episodes, you don't need to necessarily pay for any subscriptions. You don't need to be recording on Zoom. You can use a local software on your computer, like Audacity is a free one for Windows and Mac, GarageBand for Mac, those sorts of things. They all record really high quality audio for free. So something like that can be fine for solo. But where the lines start to get a bit blurred is there's softwares out there that have subscriptions, like Descript is a very common one. Now that has a monthly fee, but it also lets you record in addition to editing. So if you're using something like that, you might as well just record within the software. That's perfectly fine, but you don't necessarily need to pay for something just to record your solo episodes. Where the difference is with interviews. If you're doing interview recordings online, you're almost certainly going to want to pay for a platform that's dedicated to podcast recording. So there's Squadcast, there's Riverside, there's a whole bunch. But the distinction to make here is the platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, those are made for calls and not for quality podcast recordings. And you don't want to use those. The Squadcast, Riverside, those types of platforms are made for podcasting. They sound really good. If you're using one of those other ones I mentioned, you're going to have that problem where it sounds really bad. You have a great mic, but you can't figure out, why does this sound bad? Well, yeah, because you're using Microsoft Teams to record. That's a problem.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you're against it, but Zoom at least now allows you to record different tracks. So at least you have the ability to make the changes afterwards, even if the quality isn't recorded during it, right?
Yes, I would say Zoom is probably the better of those ones that I mentioned in terms of the call platforms. It has some high quality audio settings as well. So if you set those up, it can be better than the other ones. It's still not quite as good as the Squadcast or Riverside, but it's okay. And I like to talk to people about this as well and say, if this is easier for you for budget reasons or just ease of use or for your guests, then go for it. Zoom it can be acceptable. Video is not quite as good and easy to use. Like, it doesn't give you the split tracks. So if that's a consideration, then you might want to again consider a better platform. But Zoom, yes, at least if you go and change into the high quality audio settings, that's better. So it can be usable, but still not quite as good.
I love that you touch on that, cost prohibited or investment, right? So I think we always want to make sure you're hopefully you're watching this, you're paying attention because you're invested in how do I get the best quality audio, the best experience, the best quality show. So if you're doing that, you should be investing in quality content, quality technology that will allow you to do so. Whether you're hosting with RSS.com and you're investing in the hosting company in that regards, you're also hosting or you're investing in the actual products that you're using. So keep that in mind. Cost prohibitive, but also how do we get the most and the best quality content, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great consideration because a lot of people say they're just starting out. I've worked with a lot of people like that. They are starting a business, they want to have a podcast. They don't have a lot of a budget to work with, but they're already paying for Zoom to do their calls on. So if we can make that work versus not being able to afford something at all, then that's what we got to do. We want to get the episodes out there. We'll start there. We'll improve over time. But it's just good to know what the options are and the limitations and how to properly use these things. You can definitely get better results from Zoom.
All
You
right,
set it
what's
up.
the next thing we've got here?
I think next we move into talking about the guests, Greg, because this is the wild card. So we've just talked about how do you do things on your side, whether you're doing solo or you're hosting. We can control everything on our side. We can get a nice microphone. But when you're asking guests to come on your show, which was you in the past, where you show up with those headphones, what do we do now?
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're a wild card. The first thing that you can do is prepare your guests ahead of time. To do this, I like to send out a note and have some points on there, like even coming down to the Wi-Fi. Make sure your Wi-Fi is not flaky, or you have a wired internet connection. Have that as a recommendation to your guest. Be in a quiet place. Some guests don't know they shouldn't be in a cafe to do the interview. So giving them a heads up. Having headphones at all, I will give you points for that. That you brought any headphones, even that's important, and we'll get to why. But yeah, preparing them ahead of time. Some of your guests are going to have a mic if you're interviewing people that have their own podcasts, or they're just doing a lot of calls or interviews. As it is, a lot of people will have a mic these days. Kind of depends. But preparing them ahead of time so they at least know that they can show up the best prepared as possible is good. What do you want to see from the guest? Well, if they don't have a real microphone, AirPods are not bad. If you see AirPods, they're decent. The wired headphones, like we talked about, we laugh at it, but honestly, it's better than just a laptop microphone. Some of them, the quality isn't great, and they might be really quiet or harsh sounding or something, but this is better than nothing at all. So we'll say that. What is not as good, say those Bluetooth over the ear style where they're not near the mouth at all, kind of lacks some clarity there because it's not near the mouth. So we don't really want to see that if you've got a choice with your guest. Bluetooth can add a bit of lag as well. Again, the AirPods aren't too bad. But yeah, remember that principle that the farther the mic is from the mouth, the worse the noise and echo are going to be. So something like this, which I'm not talking through, by the way, this is better than nothing. And we want to have some kind of headphones.
Yeah,
We
we
can
realized
improve.
that if I moved it there, but I'm not gonna sit here on a recording going like, "All right, let's talk like this the whole time." So I had it, in that regards, but it also we came to realize depending on what platform I was recorded on, it sounded different, right? So I think anyone that's watched our first training video here, I had this mic. So doing it as a YouTube live video, I sounded terrible, but recording it through whether it was Riverside, Descript, or another platform, it wasn't nearly as bad. So it just goes to show what, and I'm going to screw it up. What the compression of my sound based on the recording platform is that it?
Well, yes, that would be more applicable, probably even in the editing stage, and how we could repair something like that. And so we'll talk about that in the next section because it's so important to know if you show up, if I'm going to interview you and I hear that maybe your voice is a little quiet, I know I can fix that. But if we have a real bad noise issue or something, I need to be able to know to tell you, Greg, this is not going to work. If we record this right now, I'm going to lose this whole thing. We're going to have to come back and do it again. So you want to learn the ins and outs of editing and what's acceptable and what can be fixed versus what can't. So then you're able to address those things as needed. A good pointer on that type of one that you were using there as well. This, if people have jewelry on or it's rubbing on their clothing, beware of that and stop that because that is very difficult or cannot be taken out in editing oftentimes. So if you hear something on that interview that's a problem, stop and fix it then because you don't want to have to go back and say, I'm sorry, the whole thing was lost because your your audio wasn't good. And I guess a final point there as well on that with the guest, why we both need headphones. You can get a lot of issues with echo with your voice coming out of their computer speakers and back through their mic. So much easier to just make sure you both use headphones. Okay. If they don't, ideally turn on echo cancellation in your recording platform. Otherwise, you're going to have a big problem to resolve later in editing. So when I say both of you use headphones, just follow that advice. Quality of the headphones doesn't really matter, just the fact that you're actually both using them.
I've had that instance where someone had over-ear headphones and then a nice mic, and I could hear myself through their head. I guess, yeah, we could hear the myself talking through their headphones, it got picked up by the mic, and that became an
Yep.
issue where it's like, all right, we got to figure out how to fix this. But also, I think that goes to telling your guest, hey, if you can hear that, please stop this recording and let me know, because then it's going to be a worthless recording. And so we'd rather fix that early.
Absolutely, yes. Or even having headphones too loud, or like you mentioned, those open back ones that can cause bleed into the mic, even if you are using headphones. So it's good to be aware of that as well. And one final tip I would say as a host also, when you connect to your interviews every time, you might have this nice mic, but always check your audio input settings. Sometimes it can become disconnected. Computers are weird, and you'll think you did your whole interview with your mic, but you actually, your computer on the floor, its mic was picking you up, and now you've got a big problem to deal with. So always check your mic input and your level settings before you start any interview.
I've learned the tap check, so that is always a good one, right?
Yep, absolutely. So that's basically on the recording stuff. How do we make sure we get a great recording? I think you can put this link in the notes or something, Greg, but I have a guest prep sheet. I mentioned sending something out to the guest ahead of time to prepare them for your interview. I have exactly what I use that you can take and customize and then email that out to your guests with some pointers to get great audio from them. It's at eastcoaststudio.com/guest prep. So download that, customize it, send it
We'll put
out.
that
But
in
you can.
the show description here. Great.
Excellent. Okay. So shortly we're going to get into some demo. I'm actually going to run through some stuff in my editing software and show how it all works and what to be aware of and think about. But there's a couple of things I want to touch on first, just to kind of lay the groundwork and some important things about editing. So before we get to that, anything else on that first section?
No, I mean, we've talked about mics and how many people think about how I got to spend $1,000. We've talked about the room setting and just quality. We've done mic check. We've done the variables of guest. So now it's a matter of like, all right, I've hit record. How do I make sure I'm picking up good quality content, and what do I do thereafter?
Exactly. So we've got a great recording. We got a great mic. We have our room sounding good. We've recorded the host and the guest sounding good. So now what? We got to put it together and watch for some potential, normal issues that we want to tweak and fix up in editing. So before I get into this, I would also mention this stuff can get dangerous. It's easy to mess things up if you don't know what you're doing. Like, you can learn just enough to make a complete mess of things. So I'm going to be as clear as I can regarding a basic level of how some of these tools work. But the reality is just some of it's kind of complicated. Like I said, I went to college for audio engineering, so there's a lot you can learn if you want. Knowing just enough to do it properly is good. Knowing just enough to make a mess is not good either. So we'll try to cover what we can here and make it make sense. But I will say in the final section too, the good news is there are tools these days that make this stuff a lot easier and more automatic. So there are easier ways to tackle this, but I think it's still good to have an understanding of the concepts, potential issues, the tools that we can use to address them, and kind of how it all works and how we can resolve them.
We've got one interesting question. One scenario that we haven't touched on is, uh, what if the what about if the interviewer and guest are in the same space? Right. So we've talked about, in a
Yes.
sense, assuming we're recording solo or recording over as we're doing now virtually, but that's a good one.
That is a good one because there are so many different variables. It introduces a whole different set of things in terms of how you need to set up for your recording. Do not have two computers in the same room on Zoom. I have seen this stuff before. You cannot do that. Um, yeah, you want a proper setup, like a dedicated mixer or a proper microphone setup. Even like multiple USB microphones, most of the time, those haven't been designed to be used on the same computer with two mics plugged in. Some setups exist for that, but it really is a whole different animal. You can have like a single mic, but that's going to introduce more noise and echo. So I will say on that, if you're doing in person stuff, research, get a proper setup, a microphone per person, a multi-channel recorder device or an interface or something. I could do a whole other hour on just those kind of setups, but just suffice it to say, it's a totally different setup.
There you go.
They're
Thanks.
actually, Yeah, there are benefits to being in person just for the vibe and whatnot, but there are actually benefits of doing it online as well because you get those isolated recordings. You can mute someone when the other person is talking and completely manipulate the audio, not in a bad way, but fix problems more easily than if you were in the same room. If someone coughs while you're speaking, if you're in the same room and you mute their mic, you still hear the cough in the background of the other person's mic versus when you're online, you can actually, you can mute it. So anyway,
Good points. And you've also touched on the fact that, like, this is why you hire Joel in the first place. It's like, great, today's training is to give us an understanding, give us a setup on how we can do this on our own. But as we talked about, the investment of investing in the quality of your work, and this is why we've got Joel here. So take it away, go. You want me
I
to share
appreciate you
your
saying
screen?
that. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I will share in a moment. There's a couple
Okay.
things I want to set up first. So, first of all, when we think about what is a professional sounding podcast versus an amateur one, what comes to mind with a professional podcast? Like, what do you think when you turn on a podcast and you think this sounds professional? Any ideas like what it is that you're actually noticing?
The clarity of the sound, right? So
Yep.
we've got, does it sound like I'm talking on this mic or talking on this mic? We've got the standard what is it, the jokes, the SNL skit where they did the PBS voice where we talk
Yeah.
very soft. So there's a style of recording in that regards. And I think
Hmm.
we'll touch on this as well, is the music. People that are putting in sound effects or talking music over it. It's my voice is so much softer than the music that's coming in. But if I'm just looking at just you and I having two conversation, or a conversation with just the two mics, does it sound clear? Does it sound crisp? Does it sound um, like you're not in a vacuum? You're not in a tunnel,
Bathroom.
right? A bathroom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
those are all the things that I'm kind of looking for when I look at good audio quality.
Yep. Excellent answer. Yes, clarity is a huge one, and I would say also consistent levels. So, let's break those down a little bit. Clarity is exactly the word that you used. Is it easy to understand? Is it nice and crisp and clear? We don't have any of that background noise or echo. It just sounds nice and clean. And then in terms of levels, between the multiple voices, the level is the same. So listeners are not having to reach for their volume control when one person speaks versus the other because one's way louder, or an ad comes on and it's a whole lot louder than the interview and it scares you, or laughter is a lot louder, that sort of thing. So we want clarity and consistency. um, so if we followed everything that we talked about in the first section, we're most of the way there. We've got a nice clean recording, things are good, but it really is now in this editing stage where we can separate ourselves from amateur versus professional. These little tweaks are going to make a big difference. Okay. So, last thing before we get to some demo stuff, I want to explain an important principle about how human hearing works. A simple way to understand is that the way we hear sound, there are loud moments, like a sudden shout that's very quick, and then the overall loudness of something over time. So, we're going to refer to those as peak and average. The way the ear works, we can perceive something as louder if we just increase the average level, even if we don't increase the peak level. Now, this kind of sounds like crazy. You don't really understand what it's about. Great classic example, those loud commercials on TV where you didn't actually turn the volume up, but maybe, you fell asleep on the couch, you're having a nice nap, and then you're jolted awake because these loud commercials are on. It doesn't make any sense. I didn't touch the volume. How is it louder? Right? It's because the average volume of the commercials was louder. You didn't have to turn up the actual volume. The people making the ads did. They made the average louder, and now it seems louder to you. That's how we hear, right? So if a sound has a lot of ups and downs, quiet parts and loud parts, it may seem quieter versus if it's staying close to the same volume all the time, it can seem louder. It'll feel more, it'll feel louder, it'll be more consistent. Why does this matter? It's because if you have two tracks of audio loaded, let's say the host and the guest, and you can set them to the same volume, let's say they're both at the same number, like we talked about the level, but for some reason, one of them sounds a lot louder than the other. That can be because of this average, right? So you're thinking like, I don't know why my voice is so much louder than the guest. I set them the same. This is where these issues, this is why, okay? So let's try to do the screen sharing here, Greg, and just give me a second to click on this. Oops, window. Okay,
There you go.
how was that? That's good.
Yep.
Okay, and we'll do a quick audio test here as well to see how
Yep.
hearing it.
You're good.
Okay, perfect. So I've got these two right now. Just focus on these two different audio files on my screen. I've got a little podcast episode done up here. So if you're not familiar with software like this, the more of this color, like the shaded area in the audio that you see from the center, the louder that this is in a given moment. So if we see more of the shaded part, then it just means it's louder overall versus quieter. Like this black stuff here is effectively silence. So to make sure that we're comparing fairly, I'm going to do something that I always do when I first import the tracks. I want to normalize them. Okay, and that is to turn the loudest part of the file to a safe level, as loud as it can be. And I won't get into the details of what that means, but basically we have a limit within we can work. And if we go louder than that, we start causing problems. Red lights come on. We don't want that. So I want these both to peak at the same level. So that's why I'm going to normalize just to make sure. I can already see this one's basically done. You can see like the loudest spike in this file is right here. That's as loud as it can be. But let's look at the guest audio as well. Now I can already see this one is normalized as well, but you could probably notice something between two of these. Do these look different to you?
Besides the colors, yes. It's their variation between the top and the bottom are so much more.
Exactly. So we have the same peak level in both of these files, but visibly, even without hearing it, one looks very louder than the other. Okay, so we don't want that. The average is what's very different here. So how do we fix this? You're going to love this part because I know you wanted to know what a compressor does. So we're going to talk
Yes.
about that right now. Okay.
Everyone likes to
So,
talk about compressors, so fill
oh,
me
it's my
in.
favorite topic. Before we get to the compressor part, so something I like to do when I bring in my files is just look at any really loud spikes. Like I can see this file, it's not very consistent, but it has a couple of outliers. This spike right here, this peak, I'm just going to take that down a little just to bring this a little more in check and make sure that my compressor can do a better, more consistent job. So let's just pop these down. And then I'm going to normalize again. And
And
now I've
what
just
tool are
got
you using right now?
the software.
Yeah,
This is Adobe Audition,
there you go.
but similar Audacity is another one. There's Reaper. There's a whole bunch of different multi-track audio editing softwares out there that you can use. Okay, so I've got that first part done. Now I'm going to get to putting a compressor on here. A compressor essentially lowers or compresses the audio level of loud parts, depending on how we tell it to work. And then ultimately that increases the average level of the sound because we're taking that difference between the quiet and loud parts and shrinking it. Okay, that's why I got that fundamental out of the way there up front. So let's pop a compressor on here. You can use whatever comes with your software is fine, or whatever you enjoy. I personally like this. It's called Renaissance compressor from a company called Waves. Pretty standard, nice to look at, so I can explain things well. But some of the basic controls we want to know about here is a threshold. That is the level at which this is going to start lowering the signal. So at what point, you can see over here on the right, we've got -6, -3, and then 0 is at the top. This is a level. So if I want this to start working on an audio signal that goes above -6, I would set the threshold at -6. So that's what that does. The ratio here, that's once the compressor starts turning down the level, how much does it turn it down? And that's in a ratio form. I'm going to put this around 3 right now. We've got attack. That's how quickly it starts working once the level hits that threshold. The release is how quickly the compressor releases its control on the level. And then we've got a gain, which is just at the end. Since we've lowered everything, we want to increase it a little to make up for it. So those are the basic controls of a compressor. And I'm going to kind of show how this works. Any questions about that so far?
I mean, you're throwing out a lot, which is a reminder of why you're an engineer and why this is something you've gone in school for. And so for the average person who's just trying to figure this out, it's great insights to understand what it is you are doing and thinking about when you're looking at the wave file.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, this can get very complex, so I'm just going to stick to the basics, but hopefully it's being explained well. If not, let me know. So let me just play this back and I'll just kind of show you the compressor in action and we'll dial up some settings here. Actually grow on Instagram and there's people testing 5 different hooks, 5 different openings. So initially it wasn't really doing a whole lot. I'm going to lower the threshold a bit because I want this to control more of those peaks. Actually grow on Instagram and there's people testing and you can see that meter in the middle. That's showing the reduction that the compressor is doing. So let's just, for effect, turn the threshold down even further so it's working on the audio a lot. A lot of us probably are thinking, and now what I'm going to do quickly is just, I'm going to process this file so we can visibly see the difference that this made. Now, look at that. So it really squashed those loud peaks. And then to show you, I'm going to normalize this again to the loudest that we're allowed to put this. And now, look at what happened. It's much more dense. It's got a much higher average volume. And we compare this to the guest file now. Look at that. It looks a lot closer, right? Which we don't want to just go by our eyes, but we just know that this is going to sound a lot more consistent. So got that?
Yeah.
Perfect. And I'm just going to drop back here for a second just to show us again. So the exact numbers, I can't give you an exact number to dial up here because it's going to be affected by the input signal. But like I said, put this down to where we start seeing -3 to -6 dB of reduction on the meter. Trust your ears ultimately. But that's what a compressor does and how you can apply it to your episode. So we don't want one audio, say, of the host that's all over the place dynamically, and then the guest is very compressed for one reason or another. It could be on their end. Their microphone just had a lot of compression on it from their settings, or who knows, could be anything. So we want to try to get those in check. And we're going to look at how this applies to actually creating a final finished episode. But that's how you use a compressor. Okay.
Loved it. Any questions?
Cool.
I mean, no one's chiming in, so it seems you're doing a great job and keep going.
Okay, perfect. So the next thing that we talked about was the clarity and how do we looked at how we fix the levels of a file. What about clarity? For that, we use a tool called an equalizer, or an EQ for short. You don't need to be an audio professional to say EQ, so you can say that now that you know. Here's the guest file. So let me just load up a EQ on here. I'm going to use one called the parametric EQ. That's just the style that it is. It's nice and visual for us. These will look different from software to software, but ultimately, the fundamentals are the same. So an EQ lets us increase or decrease specific frequencies of the audio spectrum. Okay, so we've got the frequency here along the bottom, and then on the side, we've got the amount of boosting or cutting, increase or decrease, that we're going to do to that given frequency. Now, what is a frequency? Well, on the low end, down around here, think of like a kick drum at a nightclub or a concert. You feel that in your chest. That's a lower frequency. A higher frequency, think of a cymbal of a drum, or even like an S sound, that's sibilance. That would be towards the top end of this equalizer. And then around the middle, between say 300, 3000, 3500, that's where the human voice typically lies. It's going to vary person to person, but it's around the middle area of this. So why do we need to know this stuff? Sometimes, like we said the word bathroom earlier, or I said I brought that word up. That, or you might describe it like that. A client might come to me and say, it sounds like they're in a bathroom, or it sounds really boxy or tinny. These kind of words that we have to decipher. What does that mean? And you might even hear the audio yourself as a podcast host. You're trying to edit it and think like, I don't know, it sounds boxy. How do I fix that problem? And what we mean when we say those words is, or even hollow could be used as well, but we're hearing like too much energy in a certain frequency range, or too little. Something is just off. It's not how we would normally expect to hear a voice. So there's a problem. And this audio that I've got right here doesn't sound that good. So I'm just going to play it for you, Greg, and just see what you think about when you hear this. Does it sound good, or what potential issues you might identify?
you're going to put money into things, and which is, just part of the game.
What do you think about that?
I mean, it sounds like he's in a vacuum. It's not very clear. And then
Yep.
I'm just watching your screen and I could see it peaking in red. So I'm guessing there's something going on in that as well.
Yes. So it is too loud. That's one thing, and also, like you said, it's not very clear. There's something going on with the sound here. So how would I use the EQ to deal with this? There's a lot of echo in this as well, which an EQ doesn't really resolve. It can help a bit, but I'm not going to get too far into detail on that. We're just looking at the clarity aspect here. This is this step. So first of all, this here is called a high pass filter. The way this is engaged, or a low cut. Alternatively, this is reducing frequencies below this line. So first of all, to start, like anytime I work on a voice like this, I'm going to have something like this set around 100, because under that level, we're talking like the rumble of a truck driving by outside or tapping on a desk, that sort of thing. We don't need those frequencies in our signal. We want to clean those up. So I always leave something like this on. But then how are we going to deal with this problem that we're hearing? I'm just going to engage one of these pointers here on the EQ. And there's a technique we use called boosting and sweeping. So we're going to turn up this frequency and move it around to different frequencies and try to find out what is the problem that I'm hearing here, because I am hearing too much of something in this recording. So I'm going to play it and I'm going to turn this up and move it around. I'm actually going to narrow this a little bit as well and just see what we can find. And then I'll explain afterwards what I did.
You're going to put money into things, and which is, just part of the game, but not, but I would say is like, you don't want to, it might sound like I'm in a lot of different things, but
Okay, so what I'm doing there, it's just easier to identify what that problem is when you boost it and move it around. So I heard, yep, that's the point that's really bothering me in this audio. Let me then reduce that. So I've got this set here. I'm just going to A-B it for you again so we can hear the difference. I'm going to turn this off. Just watch my mouse when I turn it on and listen for the difference.
you're going to put money into things, and which is, just part of the game.
So here it became instantly a lot clearer when I did that. So that's one step along the way that we would use an EQ to help get more clarity if we are having an issue with some recorded audio. How did that sound to you?
Definitely clearer.
Exactly. And the higher end of the vocal range as well, like those sibilants, consonants, that sort of thing. If there's a bad quality mic, those often get lost, and then we lack clarity as well. So not only do we clean up some of this mud, that I'll call it, in the lower end, we could try to boost a little in the high end. You want to be careful, but just a little bit to help bring out the sibilants more, because we weren't getting a whole lot of that.
You're going to put money into things. And
if it's not being picked up by the mic at all, there's nothing really there to boost. That's the way an EQ works. Like, it's got to have something to even boost to begin with. And in our advanced section, we'll see some cool tools that actually make this not matter anymore. But little tricks like that to help get the clarity match between the host and guest as well. If the guest has really like no high end, but the host has a lot, kind of sounds off-putting. So we really want to try to get things as balanced as we can. But that is essentially an EQ and how we would use it to address clarity. So any thoughts or questions on that?
No, I mean, you're giving us a good understanding. If I was to turn this over to an audio engineer, go, all right, this is what you're gonna need to do. But for the most part, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So what I was showing just then was the individual files. But if you're working on an episode, we're usually going to have multiple files and we want to combine them. We need to take the host and the guest and the intro and the music and put this all together. So what I've switched to here now is called a multi-track view, which lets us do that. It's got multiple tracks here. You can see this is a track with my voice. There's one for the guest. We've got the music. We can then combine all this stuff into our finished podcast episode. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this software much, because your software could vary, but just know that the compression that we looked at and the EQ, I've already got that set up on my multi-track here. It's already on each of these. So even though I was showing it for demo purposes, I've got it on out here. So we've got everything in order. We've got the pieces here. I like to okay, you know what? Let's talk about the music first because you brought this you brought this up. We want to figure out how come sometimes when voice and music is blended, it doesn't sound right.
I mean,
So how
it's
about
a
that?
there's a couple factors when we think about podcasts and music. One is the music choice. So too often I hear podcasts where they're playing something that's very upbeat and it's happy and you're distracted by it. So there's the decision podcasters you all need to make in terms of the music choice
Mhm.
that isn't too distracting from the voice. And the second side, which is I guess we'll touch on, is how do we make sure that music is at a level that is just being heard but not distracting so that we can actually listen to what the person is trying to say.
Exactly. So yeah, the first thing to think about is your song selection. Something that's not too busy is a great start. I mean, if it's got vocals in it and then you want to talk over it, that's not a good thing because there's going to be a lot of clashing in those frequency ranges. As well, it's used for effects, maybe a bit of branding. We're not trying to listen to Spotify here. We're not going to dance to it. So it doesn't need to be the focal point of the whole thing. So we want to use it, consider how we're using the music. But then on a technical level, is yeah, exactly. How do we mix this together so that it technically sounds correct? And this little trick that I'm going to show you right now, this will set you apart from an amateur versus a professional because this is what they would do in the professional world and is often overlooked if you just say look up a quick YouTube tutorial of like how to drop a song into your session here and you think you got it done, but in reality your listeners can't hear what you're saying. So I'm going to first play you a sample without a fix. Okay, this is going to be done wrong in this case. I've got my voice and I've got some music under it. The track choice is pretty good, but you're going to notice it doesn't sound very good. So let's just give this a listen. I'll just do that myself when it comes to 10, 20 or $30 an hour. So music is really masking the voice. Hey, it just doesn't sound like it's mixed well. Now, the funny thing is, I've actually got the level on this down on the music. I've got it down. I could turn it down more just to hear, and you'll hear that it's still going to be a problem. $30 an hour tasks. This attitude can lead to the loss of, it's lower, but there's still parts of the music that are just distracting. They're in the way of the voice. So,
100% agree.
have you been paying attention? Do you remember the EQ stuff that I showed you?
Oh
Because you need
man.
it. I'm not going to quiz you, but we're going to use an equalizer again. So here we go, familiar tool. What we can do with an equalizer is actually carve out, and I say that because you can visibly see it. We're going to make space for where my voice is in the frequency spectrum. Remember, we talked about that, somewhere 300 to 3000. It's going to be somewhere in there. We want to remove some of that energy from the music to make room for the voice. So pretty simple concept. And you can see here, I've just got this dialed in, cutting these frequencies a little bit from the music. Okay, you can see all the settings there. And now let me play it again with that enabled. Actually turn it on. And now hear the difference. Or $300 an hour have told me I'll just do that. So you can still hear the music, but it's out of the way of the voice and it sounds much better. Hey, did that sound good to you?
Yes, nailed it. What a big difference. And you're
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I'm talking about.
There you go. So simple fix to something that we hear a lot. If you're doing the editing on your own, now you know how to resolve that. Okay.
Thank you for
So
everyone watching. That is the key. If I can't stress that enough, there's nothing wrong with using music. There is everything wrong with making sure that the music selection as well as the sound quality are clear. So thank you, Joel. That is perfect.
yep, and the consistency is so important too. If you're using music in between as transitions or going into commercial breaks and things like that, you don't want the music to be super loud. Be careful what you're actually doing and look at the levels and think, is this sound balanced? Play it back to yourself, that kind of thing, and that'll make all the difference.
I got a
So,
question here. Some
yeah,
tools have auto ducking. Is that recommended? Am I reading that question right?
you can certainly do that. They make that concept of ducking a lot easier. It used to be a lot more complicated to implement in software. It's still not going to EQ in most cases. That the ducking is only applying to the volume, so you could still benefit by actually putting some EQ on the music, and you can still use the auto ducking if you like, if it fits into what you're working on.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then another question we have here that I've missed. Do you remove the inhaling or keep it so it sounds more natural?
I have never done anything with the breaths personally. There are different ways to tackle it. You could do it manually. There are plugins that can, like, they're called deep breath plugins that will automatically reduce the breaths. How they work varies. Results may vary. Only if the audio happens to be super compressed, where you'll then actually emphasize those low level breaths, or it becomes distracting if someone's setup is really making their breaths loud. Only then do I really find it matters. Otherwise, just the normal breathing of someone, we breathe. So I don't see a problem with leaving those in, both the level and especially the timing. If you go through and you physically cut the space of all the breaths, so then when the person talks, they're speaking for an hour and they never took a breath, that's really unsettling to listen to. So definitely don't remove them in that regard. You can cut long pauses, but don't cut every breath. And you typically don't need to reduce the level of them either. But it's up to your personal choice. I don't really see the need to do it in most cases.
You talk about the long pauses. So, our first training, if anyone hasn't watched, we did a training with Steve Stewart on removing pregnant pauses. So, I
Yep.
highly recommend checking that one out. Next
Yes.
question here is: can compression be used to remove background hum?
No, in fact, compression will usually make background hum worse, because if you think that the background hum is quite low, and then you've got all this dynamic range in the file like we saw, when we squash all of that down, we reduce the loudest parts, then we increase everything. Now we've increased the quiet background stuff. So it's actually bad, and it's why getting a clean recording is very important, because then you can use compression and not exaggerate existing issues. So you got to watch out for that as well. I would recommend, if you're using a software like this, apply some background noise reduction or use another tool that will help reduce or eliminate that before you add your compressor onto the chain. And also, remember I said about being dangerous, be careful that you're not using too much compression, because there's noise in every recording. If you squash it enough with a compressor and turn it up, you will hear noise. So you want to be very careful with how you're doing that.
Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully, that answers your
Okay.
questions, everyone. Back to you.
Okay, well, we're basically at the end here. We've got our music mixed nice with our intro. We've got the levels balanced out. I'm just going to actually, for my own sake, do something like this here before we export. We're basically ready to, whoops. We're basically ready to export our episode. One thing I will add as well, in working with a software like this, I personally like to put a multi-band compressor on, don't get scared on the screen, on my master output. So the master output means it applies to everything, and it kind of just helps glue all the elements together. So I like having something like that on there. You can steal my settings on this if you want. I can't explain how this all works, but something on the end there just to help kind of add a little more compression and consistency to the final is very good. So I've got that. I've got my compressors and EQ set on these tracks, a bit of reverb as well to tackle some of the echo. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually mix this down. So we're going to combine everything into our episode. And I want to show you this visually, because I personally use this as like a quality control check on all the episodes that I work on. Again, we don't want to just trust our eyes, but visually I can see quickly if there's any issues, like if I forgot an edit or something and there's a long space, I can say, what's that about? Or if something is a lot louder than another element, maybe I missed something. So the visual is great. This looks great to me. We see some variation throughout, but it's okay. There's no super long pauses. And then we could save from here. Greg, this is something you brought up before we were live, is the LUFS level. Like, what should the level of our episode be before we export it? So let's chat a bit about that, because it's a common question. There is a standard industry level that we say you should normalize your podcast to. So your audio, so it matches everything else out there in the world, should be of a specific consistency, let's say. So that number in podcasting is what we call negative 16 LUFS. So there's a certain, that means something.
Well, that's weird. It says I'm still here, and everyone just got booted out. So I apologize. Gotta love technical. Give me a second and I get everyone back in here. Stream froze, working on bringing it back. Yeah, just in the heart of this, but hopefully everyone's been finding this of value. And as Joel's walking through all these different functions, um, it's a technical side. This is also why it's good to have an editor. Um, but this hopefully gives you an understanding of the technical components that go through everything, but also the skill level that you may want to. It's not meant to be incredibly overwhelming, but more how to think about these things. Let's see here. There we go.
How long was I gone?
I don't know. Yeah, it seems like everyone just got kicked out.
Oh, everyone did? It wasn't just me?
It wasn't just you.
Okay, good. I had my software full screen, so I wasn't paying attention. And
No.
I asked you a question and you didn't reply. I knew there was
Uh,
trouble.
yeah, I'm being
I was talking
simply.
the LUFS. Did you get any of that?
You dropped off just on the LU on that topic.
Okay. Should we pick it up from there
Yeah.
for people coming back? Okay, cool. Good. So, with that understanding of compression, we've got some.
Oh wow. Stream look. There we go. Gotta love technical stuff.
Hello.
Yeah. Sorry,
Try again.
everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so we've used some compression on our voices. We've got some on our masters. So we've got everything pretty consistent level wise, which is nice. Now, a common question is what's this LUFS number all about? There's an industry standard target level that we talk about in different industries. You know, there's different numbers, but for podcasting, it's minus 16 LUFS. What that helps us understand is that our audio is relatively close to everything else out there in the world. You don't want to turn on one podcast and it's super loud, and then yours comes on and it's super quiet. So we want to get somewhere in the right ballpark. So it's minus 16 LUFS, normalized to minus 1 dB true peak is the technical term that is not that important to know. If you really want to understand it, you can go look it up. I've looked it up a long time ago, and I'm a supposed professional. I understand it. I understand where my audio needs to be looking here to actually fall into that proper range. I don't check it every time because I just know now. But as long as you have a nice, consistent, healthy level, something like this on your screen, it sounds relatively close to everything else out there. You're good. If you want to check it every time, or at least one time, to see for curiosity where yours falls on that loudness number, you certainly can, but don't get too hung up about it. And you can use a website. There are free websites out there if you Google or get a plugin that will show you that measurement of how loud your podcast is. Okay, so that's that number. Any questions around that?
No, it's good to know. That was the question I was asked in our community, and it meant nothing to me, but I knew A, the person asking it mattered, and B, that you would have the answer. So thank you so much for that.
Perfect. Okay. So we'll move on. I assume we have a few more minutes. We'll get to the advanced repair section. But final bit here is when you're exporting your file, that matters as well. The quality 128K MP3 stereo is typically good. Any bigger than that, you're kind of just taking up more space. Any smaller, you're going to start to have a noticeable degradation in quality. So again, every step of the way, we want to have things set properly, and on your export, that's where you typically want to set. Also suggest listen on different devices to get an idea of how you and your guests sound. Use your headphones, your laptop speakers, your car, a Bluetooth speaker. You might notice on one something sounds off, where on your Beats headphones it sounded really good. So checking different devices, becoming familiar with that is good. Also, I went through the basic editing tools here, but there's a whole bunch more, like the de-breath that was asked about. There's denoise plugin. I mentioned that, de-reverb, click removal, a whole bunch of different things you can do. So we can't cover all those today, but in this next bit, in the final section, Greg, we'll talk about some of the new tools that address a lot of this for you. So with that said, before we move on to there, any questions?
No, I mean, they're thanking you. I know exactly who asked the question, and they're here on the live stream, so they're saying thank you for the answer on that one. So I
Okay,
appreciate it. So let me know when you're sharing
excellent.
your screen, and I'll switch the scene and get that.
I forgot to reshare it. I didn't realize. I'm glad you said it. Let's pop that back up here. Looking good.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, awesome. So, yeah, with all the stuff that we talked about here today, it's kind of old school. Things are a lot different from when I learned about audio many years ago. So, one of the amazing piece of technology that's commonplace these days are the enhancer platforms. So, you've got like Adobe Podcast Enhancer, you've got Studio Sound in Descript, Auphonic, Riverside has its own. There are so many of these out there now. And these work in a completely new way to repair audio problems in ways that we could not have dreamt of years ago. Like when I first saw these things, basically everything I knew about audio was flipped on its head overnight. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand how it worked. Oh, it was fascinating. So now I understand them. The main premise of how these tools work is they completely regenerate the audio. So as long as it has a minimum level of quality, it can output something that's potentially amazing, free of some of the most terrible defects. Uh, some of them are better than others. Of course, they're being worked on, they're improving. They do have some flaws. In my opinion, they sound a bit synthesized. So if you don't have to use it, don't automatically use it because it sounds a bit fake. Because that's what it is. It's like it's fake. It's not actually your voice. It's regenerated through AI. So that's not great. Sometimes they can leave out words depending on the quality of the recording, or add words if there's like bleed from the headphones. So that's not great either. But as amazing as they are, it's hard to beat those great recordings from the start, like we talked about. So always lean on that, getting a great recording up front. But I want to demo these really quick because if your audio needs more help, you'd be surprised what these can do. So I'll also add some of these are meant just for restoration, just fixing issues, but they're not for finalizing. Like they don't add compression to balance levels. Some do, but not all of them. So you need to know the inner workings of the tool that you're using to understand what you still need to apply and make sure it's good. But just from a restoration standpoint, if we have bad quality audio, I'm going to play a couple of samples here. So here's a bad recording we have to fix. So let's take a listen. Hi, this is Joel with a sample. Unfortunately, I just recorded a 30-hour podcast episode and I had the wrong microphone selected. So that's very bad. Typically we wouldn't have been able to fix this, but I ran it through Adobe Podcast Enhancer. Let's take a listen to how this one sounds. Hi, this is Joel with a sample. Unfortunately, I just recorded a 30. So a night and day difference. It
Night
really is
and
phenomenal.
day. Wow.
Yeah. You can hear it sounds a little artificial, which again is one of the downfalls, but that recording was quite bad as well. But a lot better, a lot clearer, sounds almost like I'm in a studio. So that replaces, background noise remover, click remover, clipping remover. Like there's so many things that addresses, echo, like all this stuff. So those are really great. So what I showed, some of these things, you don't necessarily need to do it that way. You can run it through one of these things. Auphonic in particular, I don't use them much, but I know like that does everything. So you can upload a whole bunch of stuff there. It'll mix and master your whole episode for you. Is it quite the same? There are pros and cons in terms of using that versus a professional editor that's actually looking at it, but there are really cool tools out there these days. And Greg, I noticed in iOS 26 for the iPhone and Apple Podcasts, they actually added an enhance button now. So if you put out a bad sounding podcast, just the listener can hit a button and fix it to some extent on their own. So
I
it's
had no
crazy to
clue.
keep up with how fast this is changing.
I had no clue about that. So there you go. You learned something new. But
Yep.
yeah, I've used that using this headphone, and it didn't sound great. And then I heard someone come back from a recording with it, and I'm like, "What did you do?" And they just ran it through Auphonic, and it sounded great.
Yeah.
So, but all it was the mic. There was no
Mhm.
other issues that they had to deal with, which was nice. So it was nice to just run that one, I guess, one thing through that platform. But if you're
Yep.
dealing with a lot of different noise issues, quality of mic, there's a reason why the engineering functions that we've been talking about today really go to understanding how to clean something up.
Exactly, and if you're working with a pro, obviously they're going to have your best interest at heart, and they're going to use what's best. You don't have to think about it. If you're doing it on your own, it's good to understand just what is the problem that I'm hearing when you're doing the recording with the guest. Am I able to salvage this audio, or is this something we need to fix now? So you don't need to know everything about it, but understanding those fundamentals of how to capture the good recording, how to know if we need to fix this in the moment during the session, how to tackle it later, what tool to use, all those are really good things to know. So you can never go wrong with that kind of knowledge.
As a person here says, don't get caught in the mindset, we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, exactly. That person knows what they're talking about. We'll fix it in post. Yeah.
If you're going to fix it in post, then another reason why you hire a Joel in the first place instead of trying to do it all yourself, unless you know what you're doing, right?
Yes, and my heart has broken over the years when people bring me stuff and they say, "Can you fix this?" And I open it and it's just silent, like the mic was muted the whole time. Things like that. Like I can't. No editor in the world, I promise you, can fix that. It's completely useless, or whatever issue you might see. So always checking up front, making sure doing a test that we got something and it's sounding reasonable.
So, as we wrap up, or is there more? Is there more you wanted to cover?
That's all I got. If you have any
There you go.
questions or anyone else, I'm happy to answer. But I think that's a good starter for everyone.
There you go. So I think we covered a lot of technical terms. If we think about, but that was great just to understand. As I'm always getting asked these questions, I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna just Google it and get the answer. But at least I have an understanding now of how you're using it, how either tools like yourself as an editor or like an aphonic that's doing it in the background that I don't even have to think about it. What we should be thinking about from a mic standpoint, a room setting. It goes to show test. I think we've also talked before we did this recording, different time of day and the moisture of the air and all these other different variables that can kind of play into the quality of the sound that's being picked up. Things that we don't normally think about because it's not our dedicated job compared to you, who this is a engineered, but also does it constantly for the last decade with thousands of shows. So um, as you're right, there's still so much more to learn, but this is also why this was a beginning class to start understanding. The other big key takeaways is understanding music. And if you're going to use free royalty music is probably the recommendation because we know that a lot of platforms will take it down if you don't. But
Hmm.
if you are going with music, make sure that you've got your levels. Make sure that the quality of your sound isn't overshadowed by whatever music you may be using. And I think we've kind of covered on most of the questions that have been coming in through the chat, as well as what we meant to cover before we started this recording. So, Joel, thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, it's been interesting to watch because, back once upon a time, no one really dealt with this stuff. Like, no one had a microphone in their house. That was a new thing as podcasting came about. And then how to edit and use all these tools, it just wasn't a thing. So there's been a lot of this these days where people are seeking out knowledge and trying to make sure this sounds great. And that's why we end up with some of those issues. But I'm glad I was able to help the audience today and give out some knowledge so we can make better content and get it out there and ultimately meet our goals that we all have by podcasting. So thank you, it's been fun.
Likewise. So if you need an editor, you're looking for Joel, you've got East Coast Studio. Joel's the kind of person, he's here to help and answer. And then you've got RSS.com. We've got all these resources that we've put together. That whether it's the videos like this, the other videos that Joe Casabona's put together, our articles, we're here to help you ultimately make sure you're not fading, putting out good quality content so that you can continue to be in the podcast space that we all love. And thank you guys all for tuning in, Joel for joining me today, and I look forward to the next training that we've coming up. Anything last you want to say?
No, I appreciate it. It's glad to nerd out for a while. I don't usually get to talk about this stuff anymore. I just get to do it, so it's fun to talk about it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Everyone, thanks a lot. And signing off from rss.com. If you're looking for podcast hosting, we're here. We'd love to help you.